Hello, I am Grace Wood, and this is my planning for targeted teaching. My students in this class, I have 20 students in level two classroom. There'll be learning needs are ASD level one, ADHD, Indigenous, chronic illness, anxiety, gifted EAL, speech language disorder, executive functioning difficulties, and auditory processing difficulties. The construct of what I am teaching. Students are developing the conceptual understanding of multiplication as equal groupings and structured counting. This includes their ability to recognize, represent, and reason with multiplicative situations using concrete, pictorial, and symbolic forms. The underlying skills and understandings to be learnt for this um, construct and learning sequence is to ensure that the students are taking a conceptual idea of multiplication and bringing it into something physical that they can mold and use the strategies of number to solve multiplicative questions. And learning needs considerations for these learning goals is in line with Thomason's differentiation practices and the universal um, design of learning and the World Health Organization to ensure that each learning variation is getting the specific strategy that it needs. The curriculum links are at the bottom. The students, what my students need to be learning. This is from the moderation sequence, and every student is listed here with their learning differences and in the boxes of the color-coded zone of proximal development that they have been selected into. Um, my justification for keeping them there are in the same groups as what I picked from the moderation before and after inputting the learning differences, as I don't think that should change how they performed. I think, yes, it will change how I'm teaching it and how I'm perform and how what activities I set the students and the different formative assessments. However, I don't think it should change what groups they're in. I think they got from the assessment, they've got these results, and I think from there they shouldn't be taken out of that. And that's going along with the EAL best practice for high expectations from the Victorian Department of Education. Um, in terms of the UDL principles, I'll be using for each moderation group, the pink group having EAL, auditory processing, Indigenous, and I'll be using different engagement strategies for them in comparison to the dark purple group. With compared to the dark purple group, I'll be using a lot more worded problems, and where the pink group and also the red group as well, I'll be using a lot more visuals. Um, Doing this is a strategy because when it comes to EAL, auditory processing difficulties, and executive functioning, students need different instruction to be able to stimulate them to engage with the content and to understand the content. So getting lots of visuals that are not only visuals but specific and also routine visuals that they understand and already know. So it's not an extra process they have to go through in their cognitive load. So keeping those visuals of how many or what's this or a consistent format of number and image will be really important to draw those connections and bridge that learning gap. And that is, of course, in the representation, and then the action and expression is how they are producing the information, which will be a lot more visual based in comparison to the non-EAL students, which it just happens to be the students on the top end of the progression, and they will be using slightly more worded problems based on their skill set and what they need to learn, which they'll be also using physical as well, physical models to help them learn through that. This is the breakdown of learning of the groups. Um, I'm not going to go through that in much detail because it's the same thing as justifying this. So pink one, identify different variation groups. Red group, naming and drawing equal groups. Blue, finish off templates, diagrams. Yellows, use number facts. Burgundy, representation. And purple is worded problems. This is my targeted teaching groups based on previous assessments. Um, the curriculum links are next to the established goals. You can pause here and have a look. Now, onto my lesson plans. Justifying my differentiation practices between the lesson plans. I've got the next three slides that I'll be jumping between. This is lesson plan, this is lesson one, this is lesson two, and this is lesson three. All flow on from each other, all have consistent groups 1 to 6 with the same students, with each lesson having the same whole class explicit teach and learning and success criteria. I chose this specifically because I think it's really important for a whole class to feel a part of a whole class because you are, in fact, one. And I think if I was to break it down to have learning and success criteria, learning intentions or learning outcomes and success criteria for each specific group, I think that would be a limitation and probably something that as much as it goes against the study or goes against evidence-based practices, I don't think it's actually realistic for a teacher to be able to take every group and have explicit teach, explicit teach, explicit teach. I think a whole class can have a specific and yet broad enough learning intention and learn and success criteria that can help all students thrive in that environment and still have, because they're all still working on multiplication, but it's just what they're working on is slightly different, which is obviously in case of the universal design of learning. So, my differentiated practices that I've got here, I've got my group one, which is using a lot of, like I said, physical models we're doing in this lesson. They are using whiteboards, counters, whiteboard markers. They're starting off with explicit teach at the first lesson. If I had 5 lessons or 6 lessons, every group through the lesson plan would get an explicit teach lesson. But as this group needs the most instruction and maybe help with misconceptions, so I think I chose them to do first, and that was intentional. And then group two is doing pair and Play-Doh work. Now, this is also intentional as we've got auditory and executive functioning using physical models, and the Play-Doh is both mountable, is something that can use and manipulate and be stimulated by, but also something that is used specifically for its activity of rolling the dice, creating the groups, and then having that on repetition is something they need to work on as their main goal for their learning goal was to create and name and draw equal groups. So it aligns with that. Yep. And then also their formative assessment. Every lesson has a formative assessment assigned to each group. So the formative assessments all will align with the learning and success criteria, but each group will have a different formative assessment. So less group two will be taking a photo on Seesaw, and not only will that, and Seesaw is a platform of a parent, teacher, student connective. Not only will that be good for the students to see, the parents to see, and obviously for me to have a look at, but it's also good for the students to be awareness of what I'm doing is important. I'm taking a photo, it's documented, and it doesn't put the pressure or anxiety on students, which is important for group four because I've got Casey with anxiety. So I won't start her on taking a photo initially because that might bring her a bit of stress if she's thinking about the parents seeing it. So that's why I started group two um, on taking that form assessment of a photo. And then I've got group four taking, so group five, no, I've got group four completing the skip counting sheet. Yep. No, sorry, I've got group four doing the worksheet. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. Um, Assessment describes the alignment between all features and strategies of implementing the strategies. Great. The alignment between my plan strategies and the implementation of the strategies is here with my alignment of um, I've got group, I've got sorry, I've got group five using multiple strategies for creating the think board. So the think board is a very common theme throughout the lesson plan, and it is scaffolded to go from getting a puzzle piece, so getting a think board that's already set up, cutting it as a puzzle piece, and then having the students put it together. And then there's extension enable as well in that lesson. Um, and that aligns with the strategy of obviously the students are in one zone of proximal development group. However, there are students that may be having a good day or maybe having a bad day or maybe getting it a bit quicker. So that having that extension and enable plan is really important to both enable and extend the students. Um, and the lesson three, the students are becoming a bit more independent and they'll be growing into creating their own think boards, doing their own sentences when it comes to group five and group six. And then group three is the lucky dip cards, lucky dips cards. It's great for stimulating the brain and making sure the students with ADHD, which there are a few, and EAL, because ADHD it creates stimulus of many different questions, fast paced, and being able to get their um, get them stimulated. And then the EAL is really good for that as well because it is a practice that is repeated. And so again, it's reducing that cognitive load to ensure that they can practice that task at hand, not the learning of the language of the task. Um, justification. Justification of how the intervention is suited, the diversity of the students. I think my intervention is really well suited to the students because the plan is so in depth and there's a great combination of, it depends on myself, of explicit and self-directed instruction, enough for the students to grab, and it's got enough variation but also similarity throughout that hopefully doesn't create boredom but creates a scaffolding um, of ability to ensure that the students are getting growing in their knowledge and not sitting and going, oh, I've done this before, but going, oh, I've done this, but I haven't done it like this, and this is a bit harder, and this is why. Um, and that is reflected in the learning intentions and success criteria. How I've gone from the learning intention of lesson one, going from learning and recognizing to learning to solve to creating my own. So that like the identifying, the recognizing, working with, and then the creating is like a nice scaffolded progression, not only just for the students at the upper level, but also the students in group one and group two that are still learning to create equal groups and to identify that. Um, but we can do that through images and through tables and through integration of numbers and symbols that they are becoming familiar with. And obviously throughout here, I've got quickly my UDL and my little notes from here that I've got my action, expression, using explicit and simple, consistent language, which is super important, like I said. Languages and symbols, engagement, and representation. Representation really important to ensure that the environment is suited to the students. So students with auditory processing can't have too much sound. So earmuffs have been provided for that. And in the work, it's in group two, it's independent work, small group work, and pair work. So it's not big groups, not big collaborative groups, so they can focus on their own study. And these are the references I did. I hope you liked my presentation and I hope it was up to standard. Thank you.